Hey, we're Mark and Lisa again. Last podcast we spoke more theoretically about VR, and this time we wanted to look at applied examples of our pilot programs. And today we're going to be talking about collaboration and socialization in VR.
Exactly. So when you're thinking of collaboration and socialization, like what comes to mind for you when we're talking about the kids in the classrooms?
I'm thinking more like the dynamics of the class itself. Like, are the kids working together? What group work looks like? Debriefing and discussing content and creation with the teachers and other classes. Teachers are talking to other teachers and just forming kind of like ecosystems to experience VR.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I'm interested as well as to like how the actual dynamics and sort of the social structure of the classroom looks. And this week I had the chance actually to talk to 3 of the pilot teachers, Mark Suter in Ohio, Timothy O'Neill in Toronto, and then Steve Isaacs, who's over in New Jersey. And they each had really interesting examples of what actual applied VR looked like in their classroom. And so I thought it'd be kind of cool to actually break each of them down a little bit and kind of talk about what they actually did. So starting with Mark Suter's class, so high school students in Ohio, and he wanted to start with a really exploratory approach to VR. So he actually had his students do a bunch of experiences and then write about what they liked, write about what they didn't like, and one in particular that he chose, which is pretty intense, is 846. So
yeah, and I got a chance to actually look at 846. That VR demo was really intense.
Yes.
So if you don't know what 846 is, it's a VR demo, or I believe it's in the Oculus, where you're experiencing kind of the 9/11
event.
The event in the building itself, and it's like we talked about in the past. VR, promotes a sense of empathy, and so you're able to actually not just watch it, but kind of be part of it. And yeah, like what are some things that he talked about?
So it was pretty intense because one of the questions that I asked him was, that we had talked about just how, some of the students we saw here at Foundry were kind of freaked out by even the blue experience. And so I was like, wow, something like 846. So what he did was he really kind of built up in the beginning. He explained like what this simulation was going to entail and really, gave kids the options like you don't have to do this. Or there were different levels of engagement they could have, which I thought was really interesting. So you could be the person that actually wore the headset and experienced it, but the way that Suter's classroom, Mark Suter, call him Suter, classroom is set up is he actually then has it project on a screen in his classroom. So you could not wear the headset, but engage with what was happening by watching the person who was kind of the first person experience, or you could just be part of the discussion and not participate firsthand, which I thought was a neat way to kind of scaffold it for the different kids. And he didn't have any kids that had a problem with being the first person experience of 846. He did have some students that were happy just to kind of stand back and watch. But an interesting thing that he noted was that once kids had seen it a couple of times, it really lost its effect, obviously. And so he talked about how in the future he would maybe only let like 3 or 4 kids be part of the experience and then rotate them through in small groups, because he kind of let the larger group watch it, and by the 6th kid people knew what choices to make, and it kind of diminished that. But I thought it was a neat example of letting the kids decide how much they wanted to engage while still interacting with the content and the discussion and the debrief.
Definitely. How did Tjs Class go about the collaboration aspect of it?
So Tjs Class took a really different direction. So TJ, his whole purpose, just to kind of bring people back up to speed with TJ, is he's a tech teacher and he really wants to engage with the other teachers in the school. So he uses VR in tech, but spends a lot of time talking with other teachers about how they can incorporate VR. So what he did is he teamed up with Susie, who's an English teacher there. Susie has a class that has some students that are really struggling with reading and comprehension, and they decided what would be a really valuable collaborative experience was to have them do Keep Talking So No One Explodes, which I thought was a really clever way to get kids to both collaborate and have to actually read material and find information.
And I actually looked on Keep Talking So No One Explodes. It's actually a really interesting kind of dynamic. So it wasn't necessarily a VR game, but they did put it in the VR environment where one person is looking at a bomb with different panels with different kinds of exercises and things like that. And the people around them, that person, has a 25-page manual.
Yep.
And so each section, like if there is a combination, I'm seeing 3 symbols, these are the 3 sequences, which ones do I choose? Someone with the manual would be like, oh, okay, I will, you choose this, this, and this. And so there's this whole kind of collaboration in the process. So,
and it's timed, so you have to deactivate it in this certain period. And the whole point was to help the kids engage with one another, gain a better command of reading and comprehension. And what was interesting is it worked really well. They rotated students through. But what TJ and Susie were really wondering about the students is how to actually assess whether or not it had the intended effect. They felt like it did, but that whole level of like assessing the immersive experience to see if it actually did what they thought it did is something now they're kind of like toying with and trying to figure out. But it was a neat example again of one person has the headset, everyone else is still engaged with them, and then rotating through that sort of social experience.
So it's kind of a 2-level sense of collaboration where they're the collaboration within the classroom with the students themselves, and then you have the collaboration of TJ and Susie trying to create that curriculum.
Yes, which is an interesting thing because TJ isn't necessarily an expert in English or social studies, and yet he's trying to engage with these teachers to help find content that will apply to their setting, and so it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
But I think a very probably common thing that will happen as VR becomes more popular is that you'll probably have like a teacher expert that then gets tapped for other people, which actually is a great segue into Steve, because Steve is also a technology teacher, but one of the things that's most important to him in terms of collaboration and socialization is exposing people to the idea of VR. So not only does he have his class where he's got students working on tech projects, he has this sort of, their school has kind of an open period in the morning, and students and teachers will just kind of wander through Steve's class, and once somebody sees someone put a headset on, everybody's excited and wants to come in and just starts to ask questions and experience like the idea of VR, and it really kind of piques their curiosity, both from the student perspective, but also from the teacher perspective.
Yeah. One thing, so last podcast we kind of brushed over the whole concept of like when you put the headset on, you're worried about how you look or that kind of thing. What's really surprising too from like reading kind of the interviews and things like that, there wasn't that worry.
No, which is really interesting because I know we had actually talked to some researchers at a university who were actually studying, what happens when you're the person with the headset, but at least in the couple of classrooms that we have running for the pilot, that hasn't been an issue. If anything, the opposite has occurred, that like triggers this, ooh, somebody's going to be doing something, I want to see what they're seeing. And we see that here at Foundry as well. And in Steve's class in particular, he does the whole 20% time, kind of like the Google idea of the kids get free time to design a project. And he kind of builds this culture of curiosity, and the VR piece really fits well into that, where it's just, oh, this is this thing that this person does. And so that's been interesting that we haven't seen that. And the other interesting thing is the kids that are actually creating content, the teachers all sort of envisioned that every chance they get, the kids would run over and put the headsets on, and they're not. And we're not really sure why. We're not sure if they don't feel like their content is ready and they want to wait until the very last minute to actually test it out, or if they're happy just working within Unity and just seeing it there. But again, there's the allure of the headset, but it's not something that the kids are like every second, like, I need to put the headset on. They seem to find this natural kind of balance.
So the kids are putting on the headsets more to consume other content, but when they're creating their own content, you're saying they're not actually putting the headsets on to prototype what's going on?
When they're doing the iterative process, they seem to wait longer. And so when we do the surveys with the kids the next couple weeks, that's something I'm interested to dig into a little bit, is when do they feel is the appropriate time to actually, wear the headset and try it out. And again, like we talked about last time, most of the kids have had really positive experiences. None of the teachers really had any, horrific stories of kids taking off headsets, but they did have stories of adults taking off the headsets. And so again, I think it might just speak to the experience and exposure that kids have, and sort of the context that they see virtual reality in versus adults maybe not being as comfortable. And we've talked about that, where adults will put the headsets on and they'll just sort of look in this like limited
side
range.
To side,
whereas kids are like all over the place just automatically.
That's interesting you say that, because from some of the interviews, we're seeing that the teachers, because there's this large curiosity of VR with the students, the teachers themselves have to continue to like learn and kind of get a little bit ahead of,
yes.
of the students. And because we're all, this new wave of VR, it's all new to us, and the technologies, we all have to learn it.
Right.
And so for them to teach VR, they have to continue to learn a little bit more. And can you speak on any of that?
Yeah, because I asked all of the teachers about that, and it's been interesting because they all feel it's important, obviously, for them to be ahead of the power curve with what they're learning, but a lot of them, as they're exploring different avenues to educate themselves, then go back to the kids and are like, hey, we should check this out together, and kind of it gives the teachers a chance to reinforce, but also the students a chance to kind of learn with the teacher. And like in Mark Suter's class in Ohio, one of the things the kids have found is that there's just not a lot of tutorials and content. So one of the goals for those students is to actually create some tutorials. And it was funny because he said, the kids will have figured out things on their own, but it's very difficult to articulate and teach that to someone else. And so it just opens up this whole array of different ideas about how you collaborate and explain and share when it's this sort of new environment. And then in Steve's class, he also referenced the idea of having kind of like go-to experts. So some of his students are doing things like in SketchUp, that they're going to actually create environments where people can walk through, and some of them pick up on it really quickly, and they become sort of the independent experts in the class, that if Steve's busy, people know that so-and-so is someone that can help answer and address some of those questions.
And that allows kind of a wide range of learning. Like if you have a student who's more advanced, that's a typical model in the classroom. Like you bring them into the fold, and you help them you let them help you teach the other students too. And so you don't get the more advanced ones trickling off and getting bored of the curriculum.
Exactly. Well, and there's just so many more things that the kids can do. So collaboration, in like Tjs class where he's working with other teachers, collaboration can just be very much like, let me help set up the content for you. He's getting ready to actually do a really interesting thing. They have a group of students that's developmentally disabled, and those students are very interested in sci-fi. And so some of the tech students from Tjs class are helping to create kind of this immersive sci-fi experience for the kids in the other class. And so there's this whole piece of TJ collaborating with the other teacher, TJ collaborating with his own tech students, and then the tech students using that as a place to collaborate with these other students for that experience. And so it's a really neat cycle of collaboration. So yeah, and I think, in terms of the socialization, one of the teachers said to me, being brave looks different. And that kind of made me think about that. And I think it was in reference to somebody was doing one of the horror experiences, and, being the person that's in the headset that's putting themselves out there is noted, but it's not, there hasn't, at least yet in the pilot programs, been any sort of like, oh, you're too chicken, you don't want to do it. It's just, hey, I'd like to do this, or hey, I'd like to watch, or I'm going to pass on that experience. And so it's kind of set up a neat sort of social norm for how the kids interact.
And that whole concept of brave looking different. Just taking VR into your classroom, into the curriculum in itself, like making those changes, that's brave in itself, and that looks different from everybody. That's why there's TJ is doing something different from Suter, which is doing something different from Steve Isaacs. But at the same time, it's all under the same umbrella. And so, like, they're all doing different things that are like, they're looking for content. Like, they know it's hard to find content. It's hard to find support. But they're going out there. Like, I believe Suter is finding someone who's 45 minutes out of the way just to get that kind of support, and that's something commendable, something we should actually acknowledge as far as teachers taking something like VR and running with it.
Absolutely. And I think it will be really interesting, probably our next discussion will focus a little bit more on the kids' experiences and thoughts at this point, because now they've actually had a chance to really dig in, and some of them have used the Vive, some have used Oculus. We have a teacher that's going to be using the Samsung Gear VR. We have a group that's going to be starting to use a bubble cam. So we're just going to get a lot more exposure to different ideas. So it should be great.
So at this point of collaboration and talking your problems through and helping debriefing actually helps with that process, and there's collaboration throughout the whole process, whether it be the beginning of how you plan it, during the process of discussing and debriefing what you're experiencing, and then the after the process, which is how do we do this better next time? What are some things that are strong that we can keep and things like that. Through that, there's the socialization is inherent within collaboration process. So yeah, thanks for checking the podcast out. If you have any questions, feel free to comment. Also, if you have any content that we can share with these teachers, ideas and tips that we can share with them as well, feel free to send it our way, and looking forward to hearing from you next time.
Bye.